Hello. There we go. There we go. Sure. Screen two, sure.
I think it's the same thing. Which is more people yeah.
It's worse when you say an answer and you're like, it's the unnecessary answer, and then they're like all the rest of the writing, and you're like, is that right?
All right. We'll get going. I do apologize. If I get a phone call, I have one that I'm like, I have to answer. So sorry if that happened. Normally I would never do that, but I absolutely have to answer it if that's the case. For which I'm gonna do one of these. Oh, okay, well. Okay. I don't know where is a good spot for this. Who knows? Maybe just over here in the deep corner. All right, this is where we stopped, yeah? I think so. I think we stopped here. No? Okay. Oh, this was just a repeat slide from before then, wasn't it? From something, yeah, all right. Respiratory system. How much do you know about your respiratory system, first of all? You have lungs, correct. What else is involved in your respiratory system? Oxygen, yeah, that's right, oxygen. Carbon dioxide. What? Diaphragm, okay. Did you know that it's actually called inspiration and expiration?
Inspiration?
Yeah, inspiration is inhaling and expiration is exhaling. I don't know why, but you know. Your lungs contain roughly 300 million alveoli. What are alveoli? You know? Okay. Be careful. It's where the oxygen itself is transported across the blood from what's known as the respiratory membrane right there. You have O2 coming in, CO2 going out, right? And it's that respiratory membrane is lined with simple squamous epithelium, in case you want to know. And that is an individual alveoli, right? An alveolar sac is something different. You have an alveolar sac and an alveoli. They're not the same, right? Okay, an alveolar sac is what? Just a bunch of them, right? And it's like webbed with capillaries all over it. It's just like a network of capillaries laying on top of them. You have about 70 meters squared of surface area in your lungs. This is the breakdown of how it's going to go, right? Trachea, bronchi, then your bronchioles, which is what parts off, right? And then it parts off to the alveolar ducts underneath that. They're labeled out more. There's the lobar bronchi, the secondary bronchi, the tertiary bronchi, all that. We are not worried about that in here, but those are parts of it that exist. Your diaphragm aids in breathing, right? As well as what other muscles? Do you know? Intercostals over here. These and obliques over here on the side, these aid in breathing as well. It's not just your diaphragm. And this is the case in all mammals, right? It's not just us. So these over here, when you see like a dog panting really hard or like a cheetah after it's sprinted and it failed because they always almost fail, their hunting success rate is abysmal. It's not good. you'll see them right around here. These muscles, the intercostals, will be flexing a ton, trying to catch their breath as they're panting. Okay. We went over this a bit already from before, right? The female reproductive system. So we just have duplex, bipartite, bicornate, simplex. We're familiar and good with what those are. If I say oviduct, you know what I'm talking about? Okay. I know it's called fallopian tubes in human medicine a lot of the time, but it's the whole oviduct is the system, yeah? And then at the top of the oviduct where fertilization occurs is, anybody remember what the name of that is? Starts with an I. It's the infundibulum. That's what that is called. That's where fertilization happens. That's important to know that. Okay. Male reproductive system. Look at this hog. Jesus Christ, look at those. They're enormous, right? Provided the weather is good and we get to go look at bighorn sheep, you're going to see more of these just hanging down on rams that are there. Just, they're gigantic, right? Some Rocky Mountain oysters going on here. This, for the male reproductive system, you're aware that the erectile tissue itself is the penis, yeah? And then in a lot of animals, there's a baculum, which is what? A bone, an actual ossified bone, yeah? So like ungulates, for example, have a baculum. Most, like, I don't know, Procyonidae, raccoons have a baculum. Possums have a baculum, so on. All right? Primates don't. We're the weird ones. So like monkeys, apes don't. Testes usually held in scrotum, usually. Not in every mammal, though. In some mammals, they're still abdominal. Can you think of any that would be abdominal? Just like the weirdest mammal is what? Platypus. A monotreme, they're still abdominal. And so I don't know how much you know about developmental biology, but in development, right after an infant boy is born, the testes have to actually descend, right? Because they're in the abdominal cavity and they have to literally fall out. If that doesn't happen, they need surgery to take and pull them out, right? Which happens sometimes. It's not common, but it does happen. Interesting factoid. You don't have to memorize this, but just interesting and really weird. So it's something that it just like sticks with people. So you're aware that a tissue is an organ made up of two or more, or an organ's made up of two or more tissues, right? Okay. In development, the tissue that is going to be the stereogenic tissue in the testes or in the reproductive organs. My brain is just bad. Those come from the abdominal area, like you would expect, okay? The tissue that's gonna make up the seminiferous tubules or the follicular cells, where do you think those come from in development, like when it's an embryo? If you just like had a guess. You had something that looks kind of like that. Yeah, that's about the approximate shape of an embryo, thereabouts. Here is about the embryonic tissue for stereogenic tissue. Where do you think the gametes tissue come from? It's like a really weird thing. Comes from outside of the embryo on top of its head. Isn't that the weirdest thing? And the like, what? This is where it comes from. Cells grow from out of here, and this is the stereogenic tissue. It gets captured by the vascular system and then moved down Isn't that just so strange? Really weird. Okay. As far as the brain, we have something in mammals that is incredibly important, that it's not only in mammals, but it's highly developed, which is this neopalladium here. This is a neopalladium of a hedgehog. Here's your neopalladium right here, or dolphin, rather. My bad. This looks very similar, doesn't it? I can't read my own slides. Nothing new. Okay, well, actually, at first, yeah. Okay. Your corpus callosum, that is it's a fibrous network of gray matter that connects the left and right hemisphere of your brain. It's like the information highway between them that allows it to interact efficiently. If you had to take a guess, the corpus callosum is larger in men or women? It's larger in women. Almost always. What does that allow women to do better than men? Make decisions, not necessarily make decisions. Multitask. Women are better multitaskers than men, which is not news to any woman on the face of the planet. Right? Why would that be? Or why do you think that is? At the same time as surviving, right? Think about it evolutionarily, not now, but 200,000 years ago. What were they doing? Okay. Doing what? They're nomadic. They're surviving. They're carrying a child on their hip. At the same time, they're foraging for food, right? So men would be either out hunting or building something to protect whatever, right? Doing something of that nature. While women would be constantly on the lookout for food around them and looking out for predators at the same time and looking out for the child at the same time. And all of those things just mesh into one. And to do that, you need to have a more efficient brain such that you can multitask better. And so women today can multitask better than men can, which again is not surprising. That has nothing to do with intelligence though, right? That's just efficiency in the moment, right? So, okay. Olfactory organ, senses. You don't have a vomer nasal organ, but many mammals do, right? And we talked about that. That's the Fleming behavior and all that, passing the scent over that vomer nasal organ. It's named vomer because this bone right here, the top half of this bone is a vomer and the bottom half is the ethmoid bone. But here is like in here where the vomer nasal organ would be, is right up in here. Do you know what it means when a tissue becomes refractory? Okay. This can happen for many different things. It doesn't have to just be odor, but odor is a good example of what this means. So when a tissue becomes refractory, that is when it no longer is responsive to that stimuli for X period of time. Example is typically this. You light a candle or an incense or something, whatever it is, some kind of fragrance. You can smell it for how long? The entire time? Not really, right? 30 minutes, maybe 40, and then you can't smell it anymore, right? But then that lasts for like 15 or 20 minutes. Then you can smell it again, right? But then you can't smell it for as long. It's like 5 minutes, and then it goes away again, and it comes back, and then it goes away, and it comes back and goes away, right? This is the case for things like a candle, or if, like, I don't know, you're at the city dump or something. It smells terrible, but then after a while you stop. It doesn't, right? That's refractory. you've used up all of the neurotransmitters in your cranial nerve 1, which is your olfactory nerve. You've used up all of those neurotransmitters such that you don't have any left, so what are you going to smell? You can't, because you've used them all. You have to wait for your body to make more. Once that tissue makes more, you can smell it again, but it doesn't have as much as it did because it already went through that stash that it had. So you just immediately use what you have again, and then on and on and on and on, right? Okay. What about hearing? Mammals have pretty good hearing across the board. Ours is not the best, but far from the worst. Do you have any idea? Okay, first of all, let me back up. Do you know what sound waves are measured in? Hertz, and loudness is measured in decibels. Okay, decibels is a logarithmic scale. Are you good with that? Right, just like pH is a logarithmic scale. Right. You can hear from what to what? If you know it's hertz, then what can you hear from on average? Do you know the scale? It's 20 hertz to 20,000 hertz is the average. Usually when you hit about 40, it goes down to like 18,000 hertz, and then 50, it's like 16,000. Those up there, it just sounds like a really high-pitched whine noise. It's just like indistinguishable from just annoyance. My voice is somewhere around like 1,000 to 1,100 hertz, probably somewhere in there, right? We're really good, and our brains are really good at picking up that signal because it's our speech pattern, our communication. So we pick that up really well, right? We also pick up high whine really well, around like 2K to 3K, which is a baby crying. So we pick that up exceedingly well again. Some people can hear a little bit below 20 hertz. Some people can hear a little bit above, but on average. A cat, for example, can hear down to like, I think it's like 10 hertz and can hear up to 45,000 kilohertz, which is, you ever seen, if any of you have cats or you've seen videos of cats or whatever, it looks like they're just staring at a wall, like nothing's there, or like up at a corner, and you're like, there's nothing there. What are you doing? Why is this cat so dumb? Cat's not dumb. There's something in that wall, whether it's like insects crawling around and moving, or it's a mouse or something like that. They hear that. They're not just looking at it just to look at it, right? Like something is in there, but you just don't know it's there because you can't hear it, you can't see it, you can't smell it, but the cat knows it's there. And it's just sitting there like, no, something's there. You're the idiot, not me. This was demonstrated to me a couple years ago when there was like a mouse in our house that I could not get, but it was like hanging out in a wall. And the cat for like 3 months, just right at the entrance to the door, was just like sitting there and sitting there and sitting there. And then one day the mouse just came out a little too much on accident, dead instantaneously, which is great. But say what?
My cats just squash them.
Oh, yeah, well, not good mousers, huh? My cat kills a mouse in about 10 seconds and then uses it as a toy for the next hour. Other animals, very interestingly, we didn't find this out until 2007 or 10, somewhere in there. Someone would have to look up the exact date. I don't know the exact date. We found out relatively recently that elephants use extremely low wave frequencies to communicate long distances. Like, it's hard for us to hear because it's so low. If nothing's going on, you can hear like a very faint rumble. But otherwise, you have to have sound recording equipment and like seismic equipment. But the elephants, African elephants, will let out like a really, really low grumble. And the lower the frequency of the wave, like 10 hertz, 5 hertz, the longer the wave is between the amplitude of the signal. So it travels long distances easier. And they'll let this out to communicate across 20, 30 miles. from one to the next to the next. And they pick that up through specialized receptors in their feet. Isn't that wild? Like they're communicating really long distances between individuals and picking this up through their feet as they're going. But we just found that out like relatively recently. I'll talk about it more, but we also relatively recently found out that there's not just one African elephant, there's two. We've been evolving next to African elephants since hominids existed. And it wasn't until relatively recently that we're like, oh, guess what? There's two African elephants, not just one. You think we would have found that out like a while ago? No. Nope. Just like a little over a decade ago. And it's like, oh, our bad. Been considering them the same thing. They're not. Kind of, yeah. It's slight genetic differences, but also the fact that they don't really interact that much, ever. So there's like the savanna African elephant, which is the one everyone thinks of when you picture it in your head, right? But then there's forest African elephants, which are very slightly smaller. They look similar, but they're like not, they're in the forest all the time, or like right around the forest. And you think that's something that is like really obvious, because how are you going to miss an elephant standing there? Like in, right? Like how, biggest land animal on the planet. How do you miss this? But we did, just for like decades. Missed even thinking about that it could be something different. It was just like, oh, there's an elephant. It's the same thing. And it wasn't just like, maybe it's different. We just never were like, it's the same thing. And we just like thought it was the same thing and never questioned it. Yeah, it was just like, oh, it's just this thing. And then someone eventually was like, wait, are they different? And it's like, I don't know, are they? Maybe. We never looked. And then they looked, and I'm like, yeah, they're different. They're not the same thing. Which I just find hilarious. How can you literally evolve next to something for that long and then not even ask that? You ask it about a bunch of different things that are in the ocean that you're not even next to, but you don't ask it for the thing you evolved next to. Like, that's really weird. Okay. Your middle ear. This is a middle ear of a squirrel, but yours is relatively similar, albeit the structure is a little bit different. You have your three middle ear bones, which you have heard a bunch at this point, right? Those are your incus, malleus, stapes. Those are what vibrate and then connect to the cochlea that's there, down here. Your cochlea is going to vibrate, and that's what has like little hairs in it, right? And those vibrate, go to your cranial nerve 1, and then that your brain interprets that as sound. We don't need to know a ton about the middle ear. Just know, you need to know the three bones, obviously, because those are like massively important. You need to know where those bones come from. Where do they come from again? Gill arches. They come originally from gill arches that were then, do I have, oh, that's right there. Let's just get ahead of me. I don't know. Just like it's up here and I start talking, you know. They come from gill arches. Which gill arches do they come from? Which numbers? Do you know? You don't have to know. It's 4, 5, and 6. Yeah, it's 4, 5, and 6. Okay. Vision. As far as vision goes, our vision sucks. It's not very good, right? We evolved, all right, why did we evolve color vision? Primates in general. That's for a reason. Yeah, right, it's fruit. So most mammals can't see red very well, but red's necessary to distinguish whether something's ripe or not, right? Like, even if it's not just red, you need the color red to blend in so you can see whether like a dark berry is ripe or not. You need that underlying hue of red, right? So primates evolved that simply for the fact of looking at ripe fruit. But most mammals don't have that. So they can't see like into any red or orange at all, right? Their vision is horrible in that way. as far as color vision. Now, some mammals have very good vision, just like acuity, if you want, right? The actual vision is good, but it's still nothing compared to reptiles, particularly birds, right? An eagle can see a literal mouse from how far in the air? I think it's 2 miles or something. They can see a mouse because the resolution of their eyes is so good. They can see something this big from 2 miles in the sky. That's incredible. And we couldn't begin to dream that it would just be like a gigantic boulder or something, right? Like we can't even come close. Interestingly, though, this eye shine, you're all probably familiar with that, right? So we have no eye shine, right? That layer that creates that eye shine is called the tapetum lucidum. It's in cats and dogs, goats, sheep, on and on and on, right? It's in most mammals, but primates don't have it. Any idea what that's for? Well, it reflects stuff, so, right? I mean, you can see that it reflects this here, yeah? You already know that. So just kind of like surmise what that might be for them. Protecting retina from bright light? Interesting guess. No, but this is a good guess. It actually sits behind the retina. It goes retina and then tapetum lucidum. So what could that be for? Yeah, it's to reflect the light coming in back onto the retina. It's amplify light in darkness, right? And so what does that do? I mean, you have to think about what light is, right? What is light? It's a wave that has photons, right? Does light just go through your eye? Yes, it definitely does. You capture some light on your retina. Do you think you capture all the light on your retina? Not even anywhere remotely close, right? Not even remotely close. And so what this layer is for is to act like a mirror, push it back so that the light waves hit the retina again. And in low light situations, you can then see much brighter, like it's almost like it's daylight, right? So a cat or a deer or whatever can walk around in the middle of the night, like it's not a problem at all, right? They're not going to trip over stuff. Us, hit or miss, right? If there's no moon whatsoever, we're kind of screwed. Kind of, right? You'd be surprised. Your night vision is better than you think it is. Anybody that's just like actually like if you've been owling before, anybody ever been owling? You should go owling. It's a great time. It's the only kind of ornithology I get up for because I cannot get up at 6 a.m. usually, but I can owl. Go out owling at night and you'll be surprised at how much you can actually see. If there's a moon, you can actually see quite well, but it just depends. This also, you'll be interested to know. I was interested. It changes color depending on the animal, right? You might have noticed that your cats are like a different color than this, right? It's got like a slight bluish hue to it on a cat. If it's green, it's often a bird of some kind, right? So like if you're out in the Arco Desert or something, this is one of the methods used for catching sage grouse in conservation. You take a spotlight, right? Why? Because you can see the tapetum lucidum of their eyes, and sage grouse are dumb, so they don't move. And then you just shine it right on them, and they're like, oh God, and they just stand there, and then you just pick them up and move them. So that's interesting. One of the people in Dave's lab was out doing that, turned around one time, had the light on, and like from here to the door, there was a bright blue eye shine. Looked at his partner and said, we have to go right now. And it's like, what's up? You see that bright blue eye shine? Yeah, that's a cougar. Yeah, we gotta drop everything you're doing. Just leave it there. Just leave it there, because cougar coming down and looking at you like that is not a cougar that's just investigating something. That's a cougar that is yeah, that's prowling cougar looking for food, and your food at that point in time. So, they got to the truck with no mishaps, but he said that was one of the scariest things he had happen. He's like, I didn't have extra boxers, but it was necessary. Is this, oh, all right. I apologize again. Hello? Yes.
It is a little awesome.
There's some.
I'll make something all day yesterday. I was like, okay, where's Sean? What happened to Sean? And he's like, well, what happened to my doctor's side? I'm like, all right, Keely, you got me there. So we came to a compromise. We did sit together. Sounds like he did. And then he turned it in.
Okay. Digestive system. Where does digestion start? Mouth. Via chewing and saliva. What does saliva have in it? Called what? Oh. What did you say though?
I didn't say anything.
I thought you said beer.
It was an E sound.
Yeah. Erie. Oh, okay. Erie? Like Lake Erie? Okay. Amylase. Amylase. Digest carbohydrates. If you put a piece of meat in your mouth and leave it there, is it going to do anything? No. It'll just get, oh, I don't know. It won't do anything. Has anyone ever done the test where you put crackers in your mouth? Let it digest? Yeah? Did you get past the mushy phase or no?
I don't think so.
Okay. If you put a saltine cracker in your mouth and just let it sit there, it'll dissolve, right? Because the amylase, it's a simple carb, so it'll dissolve. It'll get to the point to where it's mushy, and then it becomes really uncomfortable because it's so mushy in your mouth and you're not doing anything with it. However, if you let it sit there even longer, and it is very uncomfortable, I will tell you, it's very uncomfortable. It's not good. But if you let it sit there, any idea what it tastes like then? Sweet. It's pure sugar. Just straight sugar. Go home and try it.
How long?
Oh, an uncomfortable amount of time. It's like 12 to 15 minutes. Yeah, it's you know, you could simulate the entire thing by just chewing it and then letting it sit there after you've chewed it, which is also wildly uncomfortable, but it'll at least speed it up to where it doesn't take as long. Okay, simple esophagus. Are you good with the anatomy and morphology of the trachea versus esophagus? Which one sits anterior? Esophagus sits posterior to your trachea, right? Because if someone's not breathing, can you take a scalpel cut right through their throat and do a tracheotomy? You can, because your trachea is in front. If that wasn't the case, you'd have to cut through, move the esophagus out of the way, then cut the trachea and do it, which is not what you have to do.
Okay, so which one of the posterior, which one's anterior?
The esophagus is posterior, behind, back. Yeah, so our rear, right, is posterior. Anterior is in front.
You got those backwards, didn't you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was like,
Yeah, so you're thinking about just the wrong terminology, but yes, yeah. So the trachea is in front, and because of that, you can do a tracheotomy, right? If that wasn't the case, you'd have to rearrange everything. That was the surgery they used to do actually when you had like heated fused cervical vertebrae. They used to go in through the front, and they would take and move all of this out of the way, and then work on your vertebrae. They don't do that anymore. Yeah, that's why they don't do it anymore. The recovery time was huge because they're moving all of the connective tissue and your thyroid out of the way and everything. It's not, you know, you don't want to do that. Now they go in through the back, of course, which is much better. But yeah, it's just like just imagine grabbing all of that mass and going here. Yeah, yeah. Well, there's no other good way to do that, right? You have to go if it's in the lumbar area, like you have to. But just moving all, yeah. All right, stomach. Stomach in many mammals is simple, like yours. It's just one simple chamber and you're good to go. In your stomach, there's a sphincter on either side. One's a pyloric sphincter, you've probably heard of that. There's stomach acid in there. The pH is about 1. It's extremely acidic. Why doesn't it eat away the rest of your body? Does anyone know? The mucus is a buffer, right? And that is made by cells that you don't care about. Your stomach doesn't actually make pure hydrochloric acid, by the way. This is just a tidbit of information. It makes hydrogen protons and it spills out chlorine, which then combine to make hydrochloric acid. It just doesn't make it de novo, like from the cells itself, which is why something like omeprazole, a proton pump inhibitor, works to reduce stomach acid because it stops the output of hydrogen protons, right? It limits them. So if you don't have as much of that, then you can't make as much hydrochloric acid, which means stomach acid, it goes down, right? So, all right. NSAIDs will, if taken inappropriately, will eat away at the mucosal lining of your stomach, which then will lead to an ulcer because you don't have that buffer. And then that's a problem because then you have stomach acid leaking into your body cavity eventually, which you would get something done before then because you'd be in massive, unmeasurable pain before that point. But, you know, that used to be, so there's like a bunch of asides, but they're all interesting and important, and you should know them being biology people. There used to be the thought process that ulcers were only caused by holes in the stomach via stomach acid. That's not true. There was a doctor in the 70s, I think, I forget his name, who cares? He discovered that it was actually mostly from a bacteria called Heliobacter pylori, which is an archaea bacteria that can survive in stomach acid, just like the hot pools of Yellowstone that are like a pH 1, right? You normally have some of it in there already, but like you could have a massive amount and they'll just eat away at your stomach. Casey had it. And you can get rid of it, but it requires a massive amount of antibiotics. Like amoxicillin plus Z-Pak, not Z-Pak, something else, I don't remember. She had to take 2 different antibiotics, alternating for 2 weeks straight, every 6 hours for one of them, and then the opposite 6 hours for the next. So starting, she took one, then 3 hours later, she took the other, then 3 hours later, she took the A, then 3 hours later, she took B, and you have to keep doing that, and yes, you have to wake up to do it in the middle of the night to get rid of it. H. pylori, or Heliobacter pylori. The test to find out is very simple. It's only like 15-minute test or something. It's not hard. But if you have constant acid reflux all the time, that's something you get checked. In the case of herbivores, though, we're looking at multiple stomach chambers, yeah? Such as that of the bison or any ruminant, right? Okay, this is something you'll have to know for the midterm exam, for sure. Esophagus goes in, yeah. And then you'll have to know the chambers of the stomach and approximately what's going on. Esophagus into the rumen. Then chamber 2 is your reticulum, endomassum, abomassum, then small intestine. Okay? Know which one's which and where it falls, which number is which chamber. Cow burps and farts are the main source of what? Methane. Is methane or CO2 worse greenhouse gas? Methane by a very large margin, right? Methane, well, you're in OChem. Tell me what methane looks like. Say what?
Isn't it just one carbon atom with 4 hydrogen?
Yep. Tell me what that looks like. Okay, yeah, it's carbon, so of course it has 4 bonds.
4 lines going to hydrogen.
Well, one's in, you know.
If you want to be that specific, yes, one's like on the dash to get into a tree.
Okay. That's methane. Yeah. Yeah, it's fair. I just want to make you miserable and make you relive OChem and mammalogy. That's what I'm doing. This is a much worse greenhouse gas. Carbon dioxide is a linear, just flat molecule. The bond angle is 180. But enough on that. It's a whole aside. I'll get into ecology topics. All right, muscular system. As far as muscles go, what's interesting about mammal muscles? Okay, yeah, 3 different types. Cardiac muscle, smooth muscle, skeletal muscle. In skeletal muscle, which is the only one that's voluntarily controlled, right? You have slow twitch fibers, fast twitch A, and fast twitch B. Okay, you can just know fast. Just 3 different types is fine. Okay, but these are used for a myriad of different reasons, right? Some developed more than others depending on the animal, right? What, for example, one that many of you would know, is anybody in here like strictly a vegetarian? No? Wise choice. Meat's delicious. What steak on a cow is the most tender because it doesn't get used? Tenderloin, right? The back or a backstrap of a pronghorn or a deer or something. Those don't get really used all that much, so they're extremely tender. Yeah? So that muscle is there. It's used, but not very much. Versus a muscle like brisket, extremely tough, right? It's the front part of an ungulate. You can get a brisket from an elk or a deer or something too, right? Just as delicious, honestly. But this is extremely tough up here because that's what they're using to walk on, right? Okay. What about here? What about in a cheetah? Why? Let me ask you this. Since we're on the muscular system, talking about it on this slide, what makes a cheetah so fast? It's the fastest land animal on the planet, right? It's fast twitch muscles. They have a higher proportion of its muscle fibers. Fast twitch muscle fibers. They have a higher proportion of fast twitch muscle fibers in their skeletal muscles versus other cats, for example, or other mammals. Except for like a Thompson's gazelle, right? They evolved alongside of it. So a Thompson's gazelle it's not as fast as a cheetah, but it's more agile than a cheetah, right? You ever see videos of a cheetah trying to hunt and then like it goes right past because the gazelle is just like instantaneously turns on a dime. It just like jukes the hell out of it. And it's just, oh! And it's like it's basketball, the person would be laying there on the ground grabbing their ankles, right? Except for the cheetah, instead of doing that, it has the ability to do what? Look at this. Zoom. Look at the tail. The tail is like a rudder. It's actually like steering the cheetah in the direction it needs to go. So if you go on YouTube and watch you'll see that they like run past, and before they can like start turning, their tail moves immediately. And as that moves, it'll swing their butt around and they'll come back around to grab them. It's actually, the mechanics of how it works is actually really interesting if you sit there and watch what's happening. And as upper graduate biology people, students, you should. That should be some interesting, right? It's not just watching the video for what it is. Just in that, it's analyzing the video and like trying to understand how that works, right? You're trying to understand, not just watch. The interesting part about it isn't really, for cheetahs, it isn't their legs that have all of this fast twitch muscle fibers. It's not their tail, it's their spine. It's not their shoulders either, it's their spine. Their spine is so flexible and they have so many fast twitch muscle fibers in their spinalis muscle running down the back that allows their spine to do one of these. It just like flexes like a pool noodle back and forth, back and forth. And because of that, that's why they can run so fast. Even if they had no legs, someone did the math on this. It was some grad student at some point, I'm sure, because no advisor could be troubled to do the math. It's like they could, if they didn't have legs, they could still run like 40 miles an hour just because of how flexible their spine is.
So is that the same systems for like a cell and farm?
Yeah. Yep. Okay. Oh, also, I mean, these things are cool, but ear movements and all of those. Facial expressions. Dogs have a lot of those as compared to many other animals, right? Any idea why?
They evolved it to make us happy.
Right, because they evolved to make us purely happy. I mean, anybody that is a dog person knows a dog wants nothing more than to be around you and make you as happy as possible, which is why they're like the best thing on the planet. We do not deserve dogs by any stretch of the means. I mean, you could leave a dog outside for all day and then come inside and it'll just be happy to see you, right? It's just like immediate apology. It does not matter. You do not deserve that animal. There's no way. None of us do. But ear movements is an interesting thing. Cats, for example, have, I forget, it's like 20 different muscles just to control their ears, right? So you ever see a cat sitting there and you're talking to it or saying something and just like one ear turns? They hear you, but it's a cat, so it just doesn't care, right? It's not a dog. Like a dog is like trying to please you and a cat's just like, pfft. But you know they hear you. It's just doesn't care. Okay, skeletal features. This is pretty conserved among all mammals, right? This porcupine here, if you look at the scapula of the porcupine and then pull out one of the A&P models, like the one of us or whatever, the models that you see, the scapula looks almost exactly the same, right? The vertebrae look almost exactly the same. So on, so on, so on. Highly conserved across the board. All of the same bones that are in a porcupine, us, cat, dog, a bat, all of them are there. It's the same. The way the bones work in them, also the same, right? There's just some minor differences depending on what it is. If it's an ungulate, they have that cannon bone in a lot of them, right? A horse, for example. Odd-toed ungulates have cannon bones to help them run. It's just, can you see the ulna and radius there? You can see like where they're fused in a way, right? Like it's one bone, but you can see like, it's not really vestigial, but you can see like part of the digit where the phalange is there, but it's just fused and it's like a little notch on it, right? In a bat wing, for example, it's missing digits 4 and 5. They're not there, but they have digits 1, 2, and 3. Same thing with a bird, right? When you were doing that in ornithology, you saw digits 1, 2, and then 3. They were there. It's just reduced, right? But they're there. Okay. Bones are for what, though? They have 2 major functions. And this is something you should definitely know. What are bones for? If you don't know what bones are for, then like, did you go through biology at all? Muscle attachment, stability. Those, you could say those are like one, muscle attachment and stability. And producing blood cells. Those are the major important things. A lot of people want to make the mistake of saying bones are for movement. Have you ever seen a bone move by itself? You have never had that happen because bones don't move, right? Ever. Bones don't move. They're not for movement. But everyone thinks that to begin with. Not for movement. It's a bone. Doesn't move. It helps facilitate movement, but that is a radically different thing, right? It serves as a muscle attachment for muscles. Muscles move. Can muscles move by themselves? Yes. Your abdominal wall is an example of that. There any bones right here? Right here? Nah. There's none here, but there's abs here. Underneath like 20 pounds of fat, there's abs here somewhere. They used to be there when I was a kid. So like they're there and they move, right? But there's no bone. So bones facilitate movement, but they don't move. And for hemipoiesis, which is blood cell production. If you want to break it down, there's erythropoiesis, which is red blood cell, leukopoiesis, which is white blood cell production, thrombopoiesis, which is platelet production. But those, just take that with you. The like support framework, right, for that and blood cell production. Okay, this is a perfect example of what would be on the midterm, is this thing right here. Unlabeled, of course. And then it would just be pointing to 8 of these, or 10 of these, or whatever. Label what that bone is. I'll tell you right now, there's a picture of a pronghorn on the midterm, and with just like lines pointing to the different joints. Tell me what this joint is in just common parlance. You don't have to tell me it's the patella joint or just knee or something, right? It says that. And then the one that looks like this, tell me what the bone is, okay? And I'm not getting into any kind of like particular bone. You don't need to tell me this is their C3 vertebrae, or you don't need to tell me that it's like one particular sesamoid bone in your carpals or something. We're not doing that, right? But you need to know what a radius and ulna is. You need to know what a humerus and femur is. You should know what scapula is. You should know what your dentary is, the different markers on the skull we talked about. You should know that there's cervical, thoracic, lumbar vertebrae, right? Especially the point that Peacock pointed out where there's lumbar vertebrae is different in mammals, right? Like that's something that we share that reptiles and other animals don't, right? So that's an important marker. Okay, we'll stop there. Are we already over? Oh my God, we're over. All right, we'll stop there and pick up next time. And then I'll speed through this on Friday, the rest of it, or I'll try. Next week, we're going to skip ahead in the book and we're going to start Set Artiodactyla. It's just commonly was called Artiodactyla, then Set got put on top of it because of whales and dolphins. So we'll get to the hippo evolving into aquatic animals again thing. Okay?